threat landscape continues to evolve. Attackers, technique, and procedures, TTPs, are continuously improving. Today's approach to cyber defense is radically different from yesterday's defense. It is important to have an intelligence-driven framework rooted in people, process, and technology to keep up with threats of today and tomorrow. In this presentation, Antony Abraham will talk about evolution of advanced targeted attacks, pitfalls of yesterday's defense, and how the enterprises are approaching this problem differently. The presentation will briefly talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework and ways to leverage it to improve cyber defense capabilities. The session will also cover the huge opportunity to utilize security analytics to make sense of the logs enterprises already collect, derive intelligence from, and act on. So please help me welcome Antony Abraham, and his topic is Evolution of Cyber Threats and Defense Approaches. Mr. Abraham.
Thank you. How are we all doing? Good, good. I was supposed to be joined with Mr. Kevin McIntyre, but Kevin couldn't make it. He's actually out sick today. So I'm going to cover his slides as best as I can as well. So my name is Antony Abraham. I am a security architect with State Farm. So my job there is to, keep a check of the bad guys. What do they do? And you look at our gaps in our cyber defense, and also look forward and try to improve our security defense capabilities. So today I'm going to talk about, from our perspective, how is this threat evolving and some of the defense approaches. Hopefully, that will be relevant for you as well, but I'll be sharing our perspective about it. So I'm not going to spend much time on the agenda. We'll just get to the matter. Before I get started, a little bit about State Farm. So we are one of the Fortune 41st companies. We are #1 insurance, auto insurance and life insurance provider. We have actually one of the largest private networks in the nation, probably in the world. We have 60,000 network nodes, 24K links installed. We have about 150K employees, agents, and associates we support. We have actually about 625K endpoints. And we have a pretty sizable IT staff, 5.5K. We actually have 323 security analysts, and we are actually growing. By the time we prepared this slide and actually presenting here, I think probably this number went up by 1 or 2. And if I put a plug in there, we are actually hiring. So if you're interested, please stop by at our booth right outside. So a brief history of cyber attacks, and it is pretty brief. Actually, the picture here, hopefully Robert Morris is not in this room. That is Robert Morris, who created the Morris worm, which was one of the first original internet worms. And back in the days, it wasn't about profit, right? It was killed individuals. The true sense of hackers, the word hackers, right? It was about name and fame. It was about showing up your talent. Sometimes maybe they had an axe to grind. They wanted to cause disruption, but it wasn't primarily financially motivated. So but that landscape is changing quite a bit. So back in the days, it was about viruses and worms. Then we sort of graduated into the spyware and bots, and cybercrime came to the space in addition to the disruption. And we are sort of living in this era of advanced targeted attacks, and we will look into it, and we'll cover a little bit about how does that work, and what are their modes of operation here. So look at the present day attackers. Robert Morris was the yesterday's attacker. This is the present day attackers. So there are cyber criminals. They are profit driven, and actually in the keynotes and other places we heard quite a bit about them. They're pretty organized. They are run like businesses, right? They have marketing departments, they have support departments. Their motive is all about making money. Then there are hacktivists, and these are activists who hacks. They happen to disagree with your business practices. Groups like Anonymous, they could come after you. And these are like crowdsourcing, right? The way Anonymous used to work is, they call in a volunteer army and you sort of opt into their botnet and you attack, you target a website or something like that. Then there are nation states. We hear about, do you want me to pause for a second? Okay. We hear about, countries like China, Russia, and recently Sony hack, where North Korea was suspected in this case. So they are in this field, but a financial industry, we in the financial industry like State Farm, right there, that's good. We are primarily talking about cyber criminals, but the Sony hack kind of changed the picture a little bit. A nation state coming after an enterprise, that was an interesting story. So maybe the fourth emerging category here is the cyber terrorists. And a lot of security experts are warning about future attacks to come, which are going to be more disruptive in nature. Because cyber criminals, they want to get the data out and sell it, right? Nation states, maybe they are trying to steal IP, intellectual property information. Hacktivists want to cause disruption. But cyber terrorists, potentially, that's all about destruction. They wouldn't even probably negotiate, right? All of this to mean we need to keep a constant vigil. So looking at targeted attacks in depth. So these are focused cyber attack. And one key thing to remember is there is a human at the other end of the keyboard. This is not a worm or a virus which you create, superb logic and let loose. This is actually individuals, humans at the other end of the keyboard attacking. And one of their primary goals is to capture the credentials as a step in the way. Then they will use that credential to horizontally spread within your internal network, basically act on their final objectives. So maybe their final objective is steal intellectual property, get a hold of your NPI, credit card number, social security number, health information, sell it outside, or maybe use your network as a pivot point to attack somebody else. A case in point is the 2011 Rsa breach. What the bad guys were after was not RSA. They were after US defense industry. They were using the RSA technologies. So, maybe that's their goal, to use you as a pivot point to attack somebody else. Usually these guys are very persistent. And in the keynotes today, we heard about the C team, the script kiddies, the B team, and the A team. And usually when you think about it, if the C team is not able to achieve their objectives, they might bring in the B team. If they are not achieving their objectives, they might bring in the A team. But what is the interesting thing that's happening is, if you are able to successfully defend against the C team and the B team, it's sort of increasing the cost of the attacker, right? Maybe they will go after somebody else. Or maybe if they are so determined, they might come back and use a zero-day against you or something like that. But by doing that, they are actually exposing their weapon. And it's not a zero-day anymore after they use that, right? So make it really, as defenders, what we need to do is to make it expensive for the attacker. And usually, they are persistent, they wouldn't go away, and they have a high success rate. So this could be, we are all security professionals, so this would be a refresher. I'll probably try to go through this pretty quickly. And targeted attacks, two of the primary mechanisms are email-based attacks and web-based attacks. So email-based attacks, what we call spear phishing. Basically, the attacker is doing a lot of research about the victim and crafting an email looking like coming from a trusted source, something you're enticed to click or open up an attachment. Once you do that, the bad code, malcode, will perform actions on your machine, maybe inject into processes, spin up new process, create registry entries, create startup entries, try to stay persistent. And usually that's just the first stage. Then they download additional stages, like the second stages, and then they will establish command and control. At this point, what we mean by command and control is the bad guy has full access to your system, potentially sitting deep within your internal infrastructure. They have access to your keyboard, they can see everything on the screen, they can use the webcam, they can open up the mic, they have complete control at that point. So moving on to the other common method of attack, this is called the watering hole attack. In this attack, the attacker will compromise a web server that is commonly used by your organization. Let's say if somebody is targeting State Farm, They could compromise an insurance regulator's website, which is commonly visited by us. And then they could also have server-side logic there to make sure they will only infect State Farm. If Geico shows up, they could have JavaScript code which says, okay, that's not from State Farm IP range. Let's not go ahead and infect them, right? So they could have logic there. And they could use exploit kits like Angler and other things to achieve their objectives. And when the unsuspecting victim goes and visits that website, they will get infected. And especially if you are using a browser vulnerability or something like that, you don't even have to click on anything. You just have to visit the website, right? The so-called drive-by attacks. And again, once that happens, it'll go through the exact same stage. Malware will perform actions on the host, probably download second stage and third stage and things like that, and establish command and control. And the bad guy has remote access at that point. So what happens after that? This is the post-compromise state. So the immediate next step that they typically try to do is to get a hold of the credential of that user. When I say credential, I'm not saying just user ID and password, something that is equivalent to a credential. Think about, maybe if you're using WPA2, EAP-TLS type protocols for your wireless network, maybe all that is needed to access your wireless network is a certificate, a user certificate from the machine. Maybe they will steal that. And in most of the times in Windows, the credential is actually stored as an NTLM hash or a Kerberos ticket. So they will go after that. It's not, really putting in a keylogger and getting a hold of your user ID and password, even though they wouldn't mind that if they get that, but they have other mechanisms as well. And especially if they compromise one of your privileged users, they have then access to your backend resources and they can easily act on their objectives. So why is this a problem, or why aren't we able to defend against it? And I hope this is truly legacy. I hope none of us are in this state. Our legacy defense, what we call LOL, was layers on layers, or we used to call this defense in depth, and people are actually calling this expense in depth now. Because what we are basically doing is we are repeating the same layers of controls, similar layers of controls multiple times, and expecting a different result. What do I mean by that? Previously, or in the legacy state, our defense was predominantly signature-based, right? Things like AV come to mind. All of these technologies work by knowing what is bad in advance. But that is so tough to do these days, right? There are so many mechanisms to bypass AV. There are built-in frameworks within things like Metasploit, or if you think about the way AV works, it primarily works by creating a hash of the known bad. Let's say I received a bad file, and it is bad. We figured out, we submitted to the AV vendor, and they did their research and figured out this is bad. They'll do a hash, and then they will update their hash database. They will push down signatures, and next time when you see that attack, you immediately do a hash on that file and compare against it. It's a blacklist-based approach. Known bad is stopped. But the problem is there are so many ways to bypass this, right? Imagine if you have the source code. You add a bunch of comments in it, you recompile, create an exe. It's a different hash at that point. And there are so many tools to pack it and encode it and things like that. And also, the bad guys are able to do quality assurance. They can use a service like VirusTotal, and they can upload this malicious software, malicious code that they created, and they can exactly figure out what defense technologies are able to catch that or not. So they do their homework, they do their quality assurance. So we have to rethink how we approach defense. And this is one of the models that we are using at State Farm. Actually, we came up with this model 6 months prior to NIST coming up with their cybersecurity framework. So we are also moving quite fast to adopt the NIST model. But if you haven't started at all, right, if you are not using a framework-based approach, I would suggest you consider NIST. Look at NIST Critical Security Framework and take a look at that. That's a good model to adopt. But I will talk about our model for today's conversation. And for your reference, I have shown where we are mapping it back to NIST in what NIST calls as various pillars. So basically, the idea here is, and in the next slide, we'll look at some of the example technologies under each pillars. But what we are trying to do here is prevent what you can, right? The AV technology is great, known bad, prevent that. That's all noise. Let's throw that out. And based on industry numbers, maybe we are catching from 30% of the attacks to 60% of the attack there. In a given day, your mileage may vary. But let us detect what we cannot prevent. And when you detect something, you need to have response capabilities to be able to respond to it. And protect things, eliminate the attack surface altogether if you can. An example here is using multi-factor authentication, right? If the bad guys are after your user ID and password, if they are after your credentials, if you use capabilities like multi-factor authentication, they cannot capture them and replay. And that comes with an asterisk though. Sometimes in Windows, even when you use multi-factor authentication, things like the Kerberos tickets or the NTLM hash is still maintained. So you need to be careful about how fast you expire some of those credential information. So let's move on to the next slide, some of the things that we are talking about here. So I'm not saying that let us throw out all of our AV investment or all of our IPS investment. We still need that. Use that. Also look at advancements in that space. A good example, which is a free offering, is EMET from Microsoft. They go after the chain of exploitation, right? Preventing things like buffer overflow from happening or heap spray from happening. So those are free approaches there, and there is plenty of emerging players in this space. Actually, I think Gartner calls this year the year of endpoint. There are a lot of innovative approaches coming in the endpoint security space, which can use signatureless approaches to prevent attacks from taking hold. But let's not forget about the detection mechanisms, because sooner or later, they are going to break our defenses, right? Because we are predominantly dependent on knowing what's bad. And sometimes these days, some of the malware samples you might see, you might be the only one who had received it in the entire world. That might be a custom-built sample that you're probably seeing today. So you cannot just depending on preventing known bad, because what you're going to see is not going to be known bad. So focus on capabilities like SIEM, threat feeds, consume threat feeds. There's plenty of threat feeds out there. Do your homework and consume the right threat feed that is relevant to you. And look at a network-based sandboxing and various approaches there. And we will talk about a security analytic approach that we are specifically focusing in our organization. And protect, we kind of covered that. Multi-factor authentication, specific use of encryption, maybe even using cell level or table level encryption. Let's consider this case. You have a DBA. Do they really need to see that social security number or the credit card number? They might only need to have access to the schema to support the product. If you have a way to encrypt or tokenize the information that you hold, if the bad guy get a hold of the DBA's IDs or credentials, the bad guy might not be able to decrypt that if that information is encrypted. So that's the effective use of encryption. But all of this is immaterial if you don't focus on the response capabilities, because you can spend millions, deploy the next shiny box and stack them one after the other. But if you don't have trained humans, individuals basically to respond to the detected alerts or actually to care and feed these technologies, we lost that battle. So this is an example of something we are doing within our network, sort of leveraging these various mechanisms to improve our defense, especially around protecting credentials. So going back to a couple of slides back, we talked about that admin. Is probably today they are using their same laptop to access the internet and the email, and that is the same laptop they are using to perform admin functions. Maybe they are using the same ID, right? So when the moment the bad guy compromised that system, the bad guy hits the jackpot. They have access to pretty much everything. How do we convert that untrusted connection into a trusted management connection? So this is, in a way, we are looking at the control zone concept. We are enforcing that. And you're not completely ignoring that endpoint. You're focusing on endpoint protection capabilities there. You're patching it. But what we are doing in our case, we have created a set of virtual desktops which are hardened, and it is behind its own firewalls. And even from a network level, let's say you are using something like RDP, you are using TCP 3389, that's the port number. That's not open for you by default. You have to authenticate against the firewall using your multi-factor token to get that port even open from a network level. Once you do that, you will connect to this hardened VDIs, and you will establish your management connection to the backend. And there also, you are using your multi-factor authentication and preferably a different user ID. And once you do that, and your backend is behind a firewall, either network-based or a host-based firewall. And that firewall will only allow traffic from that hardened VDI, not anywhere else. And by doing this, you are also, by introducing this control zone, you're also able to apply detection mechanisms. Because anytime you see a privileged activity, other than those limited subnets of those hardened virtual desktops, that causes immediate alarm, right? Something has failed. This is not normal. So you are able to limit the scope of the things that you need to monitor and respond to it quickly. So this is a potential approach that you might consider as well. So let's talk about security analytics. This is what Kevin was supposed to talk about, and I will try my best to convey his message. So today, we collect a ton of logs. We generate logs, right? This is like exhaust, driving the car, and there is smoke coming out, right? Part of running business, part of operating equipment, we are generating tons of logs, tons and tons of logs. And this log information is collected and analyzed, right? Hopefully analyzed. And this is probably stored in multiple locations. Hopefully you have a SIEM, but are you collecting everything in your SIEM, right? I mean, what about your app logs? What about your operating system logs? Maybe you're collecting your perimeter logs. Even if you collect, it's a big problem. There's a ton of information to collect. How do you analyze this? So in our case, this is equivalent to terabytes of, actually 1.5 to 2 terabytes of logs is what we collect, we generate in a given day. Do your math, in a given year, you are about half a petabyte, and actually more than that if you're at the 2 number. And by compliance and other regulatory requirements, you have to keep it for 3 years, in some cases 7 years. Talking about petabytes and petabytes of logs, how do you mine something like this? How do you consume this? So our approach to solving this problem is using a Hadoop platform in the backend. If you have not considered a Hadoop platform, that is something that could store logs at scale, cheaper, and process it at scale as well. And not only that, and the interesting aspect about security logs in general is we are already solving this problem in the business sense, right? State Farm is in the business of insurance. We are analyzing our claims data, trying to look for fraud and things like that. We are always analyzing our market data. We are seeing who is buying our insurance services, who is leaving, and why are they doing that. These are the business intelligence approaches, right? We already apply that kind of skill set and capabilities to business problems. Why don't we apply that same mindset to security? So our answer to this question or this problem is putting security analysts and data scientists together and form hunt teams, right? And basically what I mean by hunt team is you have a hypothesis. For example, I am thinking if data is leaking from State Farm, maybe that is going out through our endpoints. How do you prove and disprove that theory, that hypothesis? You would go into the rabbit holes of data. You will try to analyze. You might hit a dead end. You will take a different path. But you are doing in a controlled way, actively using the logs that you collect to prove or disprove that theory. And you are rinsing and repeating this process every day instead of just ignoring all that information we collect. And if you think about it, what we are primarily focusing here, at least one of the primary aspects is anomaly detection. That has been a dream for such a long time, right? I mean, we had many point products promising anomaly detection. Take in any context, take all the number of logins that we see in a given day. What is the anomaly there? Is that activity that we see, is that normal? Take our remote access traffic, all the VPN traffic that is coming into our network. Are we able to detect anomaly there or not? Maybe a simple example is, I just barged in through the front door, but here is a VPN connection from my ID from China. Is that normal? Are we able to detect that today? And some of the mechanisms that you can leverage is, there are machine learning approaches, there are clustering approaches, things like K-means cluster, which you can utilize to really identify the outliers, as long as you put your security analysts and data scientists together to address this kind of problems. So really what we are talking about is this transformation journey. You are going from raw logs to security information to security intelligence. And hopefully once you solve that security intelligence problem, maybe you can achieve security wisdom, right? Your defense, our defense needs to be more intelligence driven. There is no point product that's going to solve our problems. There is no silver bullet to solve this problem, right? So it needs to be more intelligence driven. It needs to be more data driven. And also you might be thinking about, is there a role SIEM still play in the enterprise? We think yes. Yes, there is a role SIEM plays in the enterprise. Because SIEM is still for more real-time analysis, more in-stream analysis, more short-term analysis, right? Maybe that is what your security operations are consuming in a 24/7 basis. But SIEM, if you think about it, it is like a signature-based technology. How do you generate an alert in your SIEM system? You need to write a rule. You need to write a rule like if A happens followed by B, followed by C, in 10 minutes, fire an alert, right? That's kind of like, I'm simplifying it so much, but that's kind of like how the SIEM system works. So in a way, you need to kind of know what's bad to effectively utilize your SIEM system to generate alerts. So we think the security analytics is an answer to that. You are able to use algorithms to generate models. And once you generate models, once you understand a behavior that is bad within your network, then you can operationalize that using your SIEM system. You can write a rule. So this is kind of a rule factory for your SIEM system, at least for the foreseeable future. And this is supported by research as well. Your SIEM systems are going to exist. They have a role to perform. So where is it, if you bring it all back together, where is it going? Is it good enough just to detect an event and to fire an alert, right? I think for far too long, we looked at capabilities individually. We focus on our firewalls. We might deploy next-gen firewalls, and we will grow it to the nth level of maturity. We might then separately focus on our antivirus systems or our IPS systems, right? All of those controls, various controls. But are they interacting with each other, or are they operating in their own separate islands? I think in most of the cases, we would find that these things are operating in their own islands. The firewall has no clue what the endpoint protection is capable of. The endpoint protection has no clue what the proxy can prevent, right? And we've tried this before, if you think about it. Back in the days of intrusion detection, we tried to make our intrusion detection systems speak to our firewalls. The moment we created a big outage, we removed that, right? It was a problem back in the days because our decisions were binary. It was just 0 or 1, block it or not block it, right? That is what we can solve by using a security analytics-driven approach. What we are envisioning is a big data defense system which can put things in context. Is this something I need to block? What is the level of confidence in this particular alert? What is the level of impact if this materializes? Based on that, if it comes up to be a high number, maybe you can go ahead and block that attack. The problem is what we are trying to do today. We are trying to stop things operating in machine speed by human speed, right? If it takes us 5 hours to respond to that alert, to understand it completely, probably the damage is already done. We need to compete, we need to address, we need to fight machine speed with machine speed. So we need to automate threat response to the extent possible. And I don't think this is a pipe dream. This is much closer than, if you're not already looking at it, this is much closer than you think. Most of your devices these days, I hope, are API aware, right? Programmable. If it is not, you should ask yourself a question before you invest in the next capability. Can I program this? Can I interoperate with this technology? And also, I think the future holds a lot of promise. I believe the future is going to be software-defined. We are already seeing a lot of software-defined network-based approaches. The whole fundamental there is software-driven. There is a brain. The network is intelligent at that point. It is not a dumb entity that exists. So if the network is smart, imagine a case. There is a lot of advancements in the algorithms, and it is only going to improve from this point on. So let's say you are under a DDoS attack, and you are your big data system is, or your security analytics system is understanding these alerts, and it thinks the firewall is about to tip over. Your session tables are almost filled. You're going to break. It's going to fail. Can you then dynamically bring up controls? Can you spin up firewall instances and reroute traffic intelligently? I don't think this future is that far out. There are a lot of developments and capabilities happening in this space. So I would highly recommend invest in automating a lot of security responses. Again, I'm not trying to advocate removing humans from this equation. All I am saying is, let's stop the bleeding automatically, right? Because the difference between a breach and just a security compromise is the time it takes for us to respond to it. So let's keep humans and let's keep them focused on the most difficult problems, but let's automate. Let's kill that command and control traffic automatically if we can. Let's kill the data exfil channel automatically if we can. And this is possible. So in conclusion, invest in a framework-based defense, right? Basically what we are saying is no silver bullet. Look at this problem from multiple angles. And there are many approaches. Like I said, look at the NIST cybersecurity framework. If you're not familiar with Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain, that's a good item to look at. That's a very good model to understand threats, how threats operate, and basically formulate your defense responses accordingly. Be aware of the blind spots within our network, right? It's all about visibility. Maybe there are many blind spots. Maybe it's a budget problem. It may be the complexity of the environment, or it could be, you're growing so rapidly, but be aware of it and actively work on gaining visibility. If you don't have the right kind of sensors, let's go ahead and plan for it, create a roadmap to get to there, and make use of the logs that we collect. We are actually sitting on top of this gold mine. If anything bad happens within our network, chances are that that information is in your security logs. How do we pick up this signal from all that noise that we collect? And automate threat response to the extent possible. I think we beat that horse enough, but it's a key thing to keep in mind. And we are talking about all the shortage of security resources. Maybe this is a way we can try to help with that problem, right? Using more automation. And invest in threat hunting capabilities. Don't just leave your logs there. Proactively look within your logs. Just figure out what you find. Just, that's going to be a surprise. I'm going to find this. Just keep hunting. And not only consume threat intel, because we are all about consuming threat intel, let's share it as well. If State Farm, if we uncovered a new way of the attackers operating, a new method that is out there, there is no reason for us to keep it with ourselves. The bad guys are really good at networking. Actually, Brian Krebs had an article recently talking about this marketplace where the bad guys can come together. Okay, do you have a credentials of State Farm? Okay, I'll pay you $5, give it to me, right? They collaborate quite a bit. But I don't think, good guys, we are getting better at it, but I think we have a long way to go. Let's collaborate better. Let's use avenues like FSISAC and other forums. And we are in this fight together. That's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to share. Our email IDs are here. Kevin's and mine. Actually, I'm from Bloomington, Illinois, Central Illinois. Kevin is a local contact. Our email IDs are kind of weird. It's pretty long. So you can also stop by at our booth if you want to find out about more. What do we do? If you want to come work for us someday, check us out. We are a pretty sizable IT organization, and there will be plenty of challenges that we can use your help to solve. And I will open up the floor for question and answers. Any comments? Anything looks familiar? Anything you are considering? Yes, ma'am. So we developed this about 6 months before NIST came out with their pillar model. But we are moving more and more to the NIST model because then you are speaking a common language, and the auditors are expecting more of the NIST approach as well. So if you are looking new into this space, I will highly recommend to go and look at the NIST framework. So in a way, so that's a great question. So what we are trying to do is, in addition to internally looking at maturity levels of various capabilities, we bring in external analysts, actually expert firms who can measure our maturity against other organizations. We also participate in various forums like FSISAC and ISF. We participate in surveys, and we are always looking at, are we on par? I mean, anything when we try to do, we want to know, are we lagging, are we leading, or are we right about in the same level as everybody else? We are also actively looking into how the threat landscape is changing. For example, malware-less attacks are becoming more common, right? The bad guys are not using malware specifically anymore. They are doing it the old-fashioned way. Memory-only attacks, no files ever dropped on your system. So you need to keep up with those trends as well to then look at your organization and see, can I defend against this? How do I defend against this kind of attacks? So it's a constant vigilance, and it's keeping up to date. Yes.
Sometimes there are like insiders.
Uh-huh.
How do you catch them? I mean, not everything can be automated.
No, absolutely. Not everything can be automated. That's a great point. But at least let's automate to the extent possible so that we can focus on that kind of problems. We can focus on the insider threats, or we can focus on the difficult attacks. But if you know what's command and control, why not we stop it? Go ahead and stop it, right? Versus trying to take next couple of hours to understand the attack, attribute it to various players, and then stop it. Or maybe even talk about our own change management mechanisms, right? Maybe it takes us a few hours to call the change manager and basically do the response, right? Too late, in my opinion. Any questions, thoughts? Are you guys doing similar approaches? Are you familiar with NIST? Anything, any words of wisdom anybody can share from the group? Otherwise, thank you so much for this opportunity. Like I said, I'm from Bloomington, Illinois. I would really like to come here in the winter, when it is when it is 30 degrees here, it is minus 30 back home, right? So we would, State Farm, we definitely want to be part of this community. We are interested in coming back and talking to you more about it as well. Thank you.